Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Eight Principles Voices. This is Larry Johnson, your host and founder of the Eight Principles. And I have with me as my guest Tami Heim, who is currently serving as CEO of the Christian Leadership Association. And she's a delightful lady. I think you're going to she just got a great personality. She has great things she wants to share with us today. And she's leading an organization in which I have an intense interest, and I'm eager to learn more. Welcome, Tami.
So good to be with you, Larry. Looking forward to our conversation.
So, you know, I'll ask you a question that was asked of somebody else, a young person. I'll give you the story behind it real quickly. When I was working in one of my higher ed assignments, as a chief advancement officer, I had the privilege of negotiating a substantial scholarship fund from a automobile executive, the CEO of a major automobile, one of the big three, and it was his alumna. And there were 6 students who were given the first year, and we had him out to campus, and the students were invited. And at one point, this young man said, "So, Mr. McClernand," he said, "how do you get to be CEO?" All right. And the answer was incredible. Essentially, it was that, well, young man, you just do each job the very best you can and move to the next job. I mean, of course, I'm not sure if that's what he realized the good advice he was getting, but I'm going to reinvert that and say, so Tami, how do you get to be CEO of the Christian Leadership Association?
Oh, Larry, it is a really good question. I would have to say that, that probably the big pivot point in my life is, coming to full faith and surrender to Christ the day after I graduated from Purdue University. Prior to that, I was very driven. I was very ambitious. I had known what I wanted to do since I was 7. And I did not waver from that course. I never was confused about my major. And I was very strategic about how I used my hours and spent the night at the placement center when it was time to do interviews so that I could make sure that my name was on all the right lists. So I had a great dream and ambition, just to have a different life than my parents. They lived very modestly. They were very poor. My Christian education at the time was funded by my grandmother, who was Catholic. So I grew up in the Catholic faith. And from as little as I could remember, was always in love with God and the image of God. And she taught me a lot of things and ensured that I had that foundation. When I went to college, I remained faithful to that. I was probably the only person that went to 7:30 Mass every day out of a student body of 42,000. There were 12 of us that faithfully showed up. So there was a part of me that was ingrained about being faithful in that. And that was a component. That was a department, that was just part of my life. But really, I was driven by ambition. The last 45 days I was on campus, I went to church. I got the job offer, like the ultimate dream job. And I was just sitting in church and I was so arrogant. I was like, God, look at me. Here I am. I've got this whole thing. And I will tell you that that church was cold, dark, and it was quiet. And I had never felt more distance than God or the idea of God in my whole life. So I got up, I went to the bookstore, I bought a Bible. And in the 45 days I had left on campus with basically no real responsibilities because the grades were locked, things were moving, and I was finishing up. I had done some interviews and I kind of planned it that way. I got immersed in God's word, and I really believe the Holy Spirit wooed me until the day after graduation when I made the decision. My brother, who had come to faith in Christ, had really been diligently praying for me. I mean, really the intercessor, the one in the gap, that God would do something meaningful with my life. And when I had this overwhelming feeling, when I was unpacking, getting ready to pack again to go on my big life adventure, I went out to the garage and he was looking for a needle nose plier. He had an ichthus, and that was all he could afford. He was going to pry that off his chain and give that to me as my graduation gift. And I stood there and I said, Ron, I just decided I don't live another day of my life without Jesus Christ in control of it. And I don't even know what that means.
I'm thinking about what you said.
Yeah.
I was very full of myself.
Yes.
I went to church and it was cold and dark. It's almost like God saying, "Ooh, we have to recalibrate this." He's
Exactly.
distancing himself from you a little bit, and then
Felt it totally in my spirit.
and then you're ready for the next step.
And I think that's the pivot point. So when you talk about this idea of just really work hard, well, I was in a position, had I been left to the life that I wanted, not the one that he wanted for me, I probably, I think it would have been very dangerous. I would have been very driven. I would have been very caught up. I would have been thinking, even in college, like, I'm going to take this and here's the next step. So there was this calculating quality. And I think the miracle of my story is he transferred my ambition from my selfish gain to really surrendering myself and said, what do you want to do? And Larry, after college, after I made that confession of faith, God worked a miracle through my entire family. And it was 2 months later that my entire family was baptized in an upground pool to the song of Amazing Grace. And it was like miracle upon miracle. And I withdrew. So I had an apartment, I had a roommate, I had this big job, big paying job waiting for me. And I called and said, I'm not coming. So I told them I wasn't coming. I had to call my beloved roommate from college and tell her I was not coming, but I would do what I could to try to offset the expense of the apartment until she could find a roommate. I mean, it was, how do I make this right? And then I just went into a season of waiting on God and just saying, and at that point, it's that first love fire. I'm like, I'm ready to go to Africa. I'll go wherever you send. I mean, there was this overwhelming zeal. But God sent me right back into the door of business. And it was a humbling experience because I went back to Federated Department Stores, and I'd worked for them since I was 16 years and, 16 years old. They had made an offer. It wasn't near compared to the offer that I accepted. And it was for what I really wanted to do. But, I was in Indianapolis and I called in and just so happened they were opening a new store. And they said, yeah, we could bring someone else into the training class. And they offered me less than they originally offered me. And it ended up being the lowest offer of any that was offered. But God's perfect timing. But what had changed in my heart is I was thinking about today. I wasn't thinking about what do I do today to advance tomorrow. I was just thinking about, God, what do you want me to do today? Being in that state of being very present. And God honored that in ways that exceeded anything I could have ever thought of in that time at Federated. And by 23, I was a divisional group manager. I was managing peers. And when I was told I was moving to that position, my thing was like, me? So that posture of, oh, I can do anything and I want that, all of a sudden it was like every promotion that would come, I was like, Lord, I'm really going to need you for this.
You know,
Like this feeling of I am not competent. I need you to complete me.
I'm listening.
And
I'm listening
that
to
was the whole journey.
I'm listening to what you said about being driven and going and making this plan, this plan, this plan, this plan.
Oh, yeah.
I'm reminded of one of my favorite authors, Agatha Christie. All right. She said once, life is what happens while you make your plans.
So true. So true. And then it takes on a whole nother level when you're living that by faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was the story. So it was a daily journey, and it was coming to points and times where saying, okay, God, you're moving me and you're asking me to do something that is uncomfortable. I would say my promotions were marked with high levels of being uncomfortable. Like, this just feels so big. I just don't know that I'm ready for this. And God was just with me every step of the way. But I was always about, what do I do today? How do I make the most of today? How do I steward what I've been given? How am I faithful in that? How am I, a worker approved in the things that I was doing every day? And obviously I was being discipled and I was growing in my faith. And
So you
so I
started. So you started in retail,
Mhm.
and how long did you do that? And what was the next step? When did you? Because obviously you're not in retail now. It's been a while.
No, I'm not in retail now. So I obviously started in retail, and that was always my dream. I saw the Miracle on 34th Street and I said, I want to be Maureen O'Hare. I mean, that was it. And ironically enough, all the Federated stores today are called Macy's. But unfortunately, I left before I got to realize maybe that part of the dream. And it was interesting because in retail, I was called to run a downtown store, which was always my dream. And I just thought, I
And
never expected I would.
those were the flagship stores, Tammy.
Those were the flagship stores. And it was just interesting how I came into that. But I did that until 1996. And I was running, multiple divisions within Federated. And then I was extended the opportunity to come work for Borders. And that would have been a move to Michigan. And they were just under $1 billion and they wanted to double in size. And they knew, based on the way that they had geographically laid out the stores, that they needed someone who was clear and understood leverage and how to build a leadership pipeline. Because if you're going to double in size, you need to get people equipped to do that. Now, by God's grace, Federated had the best training. And I attended multiple executive weeks through Ohio University, the Ohio University, and they really invested in their people. And through all my years there, I was able to put a lot of that into practice. So again, God was developing my competency, but it took 6 months for me to make that decision, Larry. And finally, my husband said, "Are we going to obey God or not?" Because I was comfortable and I had these deep relationships and this deep knowledge of what was happening in the retail industry. And yeah, I had gotten comfortable. And then it was like, are you going to take that
This is
step of
where
faith?
a lot of
And so
well, a lot of nonprofit organizations, I guess it's just a human sense, is that they like being comfortable. If they're challenged or they have to do
yeah.
things a different way, or they have to reach out to people in a different way, or their systems have to change in some way, oh, it gets really, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times, I worked for Ketchum early in my fundraising career, and I worked in communities all over the country and for virtually every major nonprofit vertical, big, small. I can't tell you how many the times I've heard things like, well, we've never done it that way before,
Mhm.
or we don't do it that way. I'm like, are you just sort of admitting your ignorance and reluctance? I mean, what is this? And for some of them, it was a badge of honor. Actually, it wasn't like maybe we need to rethink this paradigm a little bit. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I learned that there was this model that said there's business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And then you always slip into crisis. And it's usually the pain of crisis that causes change. And with that change, you create a new reality. And then that new reality eventually becomes your new business as usual. Well, with the dynamics of everything that was happening in retail and then with the digital, the dot-com boom and all of that, we were constantly in crisis. The key is to be at a mindset that says there's business as usual, but we want to be innovating before the crisis, and getting a mindset that says, how do we do that? And, that takes a God-sized kind of creativity to be able to see and do that. So I was with Borders 8 years. 2 years after I was there, they called me in after I had traveled and said, "Oh, you're going to be president." I can't, just like, really, Lord. And then the day I became president, after serving in a mismatch, it was like a mishmash of jobs overseeing things, because I'd always had direct profit and loss responsibility and never been on staff. So they cobbled together a lot of staff positions to report to me so that I could learn them the year before I would take on that role. And then when I took on that role, they came in and said, "Oh, by the way, that little borders.com that's just like a little skunk work over here?" And this was when Amazon was just starting. I mean, they were parking vans in front of our bookstore parking lots.
Filling them up
And
with
they said,
books.
yeah, like, take this on. And at the time, it had generated $17 million in sales and had lost 28 million. And by then, Amazon was so far ahead. And I was like, and again, it was another thing that said, in fact, I remember saying, as humbly, very humbly, I said, "Now, I need my assistant to load a floppy disk." To which the response was, Tammy, we can get you an army to load your floppy disk. We're looking for the strategy on how we integrate the brand and we move forward. And I'm like, okay, then we're going to roll with this.
And for our audience, which includes people, you're using a term floppy disk. I understand what that is. You understand what that is. That is a memory device, a memory.
It's like with the rotary phone. It's in there with the rotary phone. Yeah.
First of all, they were like this, but I remember when I was at Westinghouse, Tammy, when the floppy disk,
yes,
those Wang word processors, it was the size of an LP. Remember those things? Okay, so now everything is integrated, everything is it's okay, keep going.
Yes, and our computers were like this fat. I mean, they were deep. So that was a fascinating journey. And again, God was so faithful in the 8 years that I served there. And there's miracle. I mean, sometimes I think that could be more than a chapter. That could be so many lessons learned along the way. And then in 2004, we were caregiving for my mother, and she had 9 months of in-home hospice, and her last time she had Alzheimer's. Never left the bed. And, my mission in life at that time was to make sure that she could go into glory without a bed sore on her body. And so we got to be with her, when she got promoted to heaven. And I felt like God was working during that time, and there were a lot of things going on. And that was the year that we went to war with Iran. Okay. And
you mean Iraq?
And it was like Iraq. I'm sorry, Iraq. I'm thinking.
Yeah, current times. Yes.
Currently, yes, Iraq. And, as a result of 9/11, and we lost, we had a border store at the base of the towers, that by God's grace, many people's lives were saved through that store. And then everything was so uncertain, and sales dropped. People were stunned. They didn't know what was coming next. I mean, nobody had the answers about what to expect. So it started out to be a very difficult year for Borders. And in the first month, we dropped to a negative 5.7 comp. And we had never had a negative comp in the history in the 30 some years that the organization existed. I would say the lever plan was like, oh, what would happen if it was ever 2? And you kind of knew what you would do if it was a negative 2. That was your contingency planning. No one ever thought about 5.7. And there were just so many things that were happening in that time. And then I think we were already like a negative 65 million on net income. But by the end of the year, really just the hand of God in favor in so many ways. We ended that year with the largest volume year, 2.9 billion. We actually had $115 million in net income positive. So there was this huge swing that took place. And the stock, peaked at a 5-year high. And during that time with my mother, I got involved with the CEO Forum, which was a division of Focus on the Family. Beloved Henry Blackaby was our chaplain.
Oh.
And it was top leaders in Fortune 500 companies that were Christian. And it was the first time that anyone ever talked to us, more directly about faith at work and how we're living that out. And I had teamed up with someone to do Experiencing God. And just like it has for so many people, totally God's perfect timing for me to understand crisis where I was, how to lean into him. And I knew that there was something more. My daughter was entering her senior year in high school. I'd never been a stay-at-home mom. And I said, I'm putting on my jeans and I'm going to be softball mom. And, God made it possible that was like a love letter to my soul to have that year before she would go away to college. And then after she left, a while.
You left.
I what?
You left Borders.
Yes. And the last thing I did was the 2005 March, or 2004, the March financial call, the analyst call.
Yes.
So the last thing I did before I left, and then I tidied things up. They had to January to March to plan who would be the successor and all of that. And they were great on succession planning. So it wasn't that that was like an impossible thing for them to have to pull out. And I took that summer off, and people would call and say, oh, we want you to come run this organization or that organization and do that. And I just knew in my heart that I was doing what God wanted me to do right now. And I said, well, my daughter goes to school in the fall, and I'm living the most important thing in my life right now with her. And we took her to school. And after that, then I had 3 phone calls and 3 interviews. And I went away to a monastery. And then God made it really clear I was to come to Nashville to work for Thomas Nelson Christian Publishing. Another breaking of God in me, because when I worked in book retail, sometimes I would find myself frustrated by publishers.
Really?
Because a lot of times publishers wouldn't think like business people in terms of, oh, we had this #1 bestseller, and I guess we're just not going to have it this year. And not thinking about, how do we replace those dollars? How do we innovate? What are we going to do?
Why was that book successful? What, can we build on that success? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
How do we build a brand? Are there things we can restore? And so a lot of times I would sit in meetings with publishers, and I'd be so frustrated. Well, now here I am putting those shoes on. So I went there as the chief publishing officer, and again said to God, Lord, I need you, and I need you now. At the time, I had 7 senior vice presidents, and they were so knowledgeable about the industry. They were brilliant. And I learned quickly that my job was to set the stage so that they could take it and be the experts, and that Thomas Nelson would be seen as a family of brands and experts. So, and Publishers Weekly would want to talk to me, and I'm like, you want to talk about Bible, you need to talk to Wayne Hastings. You want to talk about fiction, you need to talk to Anna. So I was directing them to the true thought leaders in those different genres, and had an amazing time at Thomas Nelson connecting. But then, like anything, there was a season. Thomas Nelson was acquired by Intermedia, and we had just released Max Lucado's book 316 and sold like a crazy amount of copies. And then I knew in a moment that I was just released to go, that the objectives now of the new owners weren't the missional objectives that I had. And it was still for profit. And so I stepped away from that, and then ended up being a partner in a web tech firm, where I learned a lot more about digital, and was serving nonprofits and publishers, and did that for a couple of years. And then the door opened to 3 nonprofits all at the same time. And Larry, I would say that there was something in my heart. I would go to God and I'm like, God, why isn't my heart breaking for this? Like, I would meet these inspirational people that would say, we have to have clean water. Or they would say, we have to end sex trafficking. There can be no more poverty. And I said, Lord, I love all these things, but why don't I have that hole in why am I not feeling that deep ache for that one thing?
What's missing?
And what's missing? And then, so 2 of those ministries were like that, cause related. And I thought, I can be a champion of that. But when I went to interview for Christian Leadership Alliance, I didn't know anything about it. And I sat there and I said, Lord, you've had me in boot camp all my life for this moment. Because Christian Leadership Alliance is about the business of ministry. It's the stewardship of the resources. It's how do we, grow in our competencies as well as our character, so that we have a foundation in these ministries. When God says go, they go fast. And I remember walking around the campus of Azusa Pacific University, where I had interviewed with the entire board. And I knew that this was it. And again, it's that huge shift of, there's a big difference between being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and being the CEO of a nonprofit ministry association.
It's an association. It's not even a single focused organization. You're really member focused for a larger purpose.
Yes.
You used a phrase that I'm very familiar with: competence and character. That's a Stephen Covey phrase, you may know. He was really big on that.
Yes, yes.
And you and I both, there are a lot of very well-meaning Christian people that are very focused on character, competence not so much. And so that it's got to be both. It's not just one. Or if you have just competence, well then you can get off the rails that way. And then if you have just character, well, this is maybe you'll like this, maybe you won't. But sometimes I say, God save me from nice people. People who are just so wonderfully minded, but they don't have a competent background or anything to make it happen. And it really
Right.
takes both.
It
And
really is the beauty in both.
mhm.
It's the beauty in both.
And I like what you said.
And so I was compelled.
So then I like what you said about the the association focusing on the business of ministry. How is this, and business in the big sense of that word? It's not just. I mean, there has to be in any ministry that has to be a workable financial model, or it doesn't stay around for very long. Resources are a big part of that. I want to try something on you. Okay, now most nonprofit fundraising, and this would include even Christian fundraising, ministry, it's what I call linear in its approach. And that is they have a mission. It's probably a well-meaning, excellent mission. All right. They're going to have money to fund that mission. So they sort of go out here and get money and they bring it in, all right, just from some sources out here, and they apply it to their mission. Well, that will raise money, but not in the sustainable transformational way that another paradigm will do it. And here's what we at the 8 Principles do. It's really, you have investors. That's what I call charitable donors. They're investors. They're investing in their values and visions. All right. And they are expecting a return. It's just not a tangible one. All right. And they're coming together with the organization that has the mission and the vision. And it becomes two parties coming together to accomplish something that neither can do alone, you see. And of course, in the words of Henry Nouwen, my mentor at Yale, that's really the coming of the kingdom of heaven. That's what he's saying. All right. So that when that happens, real magic occurs, because then it goes out into the world, into the community, to really transform the surrounding community. And at the 8 Principles, we have a concept that we call the triple win, which is another way of putting it. You have the philanthropist applying their resource, which is energy and direction and money, into the nonprofit, and they become the conduit that affects the community, and it becomes this sort of triangular motion where everyone, think about this, all three parties, the philanthropist, the organization, the community of beneficiaries, they're all winners, but they're winners for different reasons. It's not the same reason. And I spoke to someone recently where I said this, and of course he got it immediately. I'm sure you will. Any or nonprofit, if they can provide an experience for their investor that they can't purchase, go out and buy somewhere, they will literally throw money at you because they can't buy it. It becomes truly priceless. And so that and priceless doesn't mean without price. It means the price is so high you could never buy it. So instead, by investing, you're going to get it instead. You see, it's that. And
well, I would say it's deeply transformational for the person.
yes,
Is why it's priceless. It is something that activates in their heart that they've never experienced before, and it changes the way they live, the way they love, and the way they give.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for me, really the highest goal of any nonprofit or ministry is providing their investors with those experiences. And by doing so, they really change the world. And that, and by the way, the research has been done. Do you know a man by the name of Russell James? Now, that's a man you should meet, Tami. He is Russell James. He's a professor at Texas Tech. A good Christian man, but also a former college president, now a researcher in fundraising. He's done the research that we use to promote our own approach, and that is that when you do it the way I just described to you in a formal way, you achieve incredible transformative results. In fact, later today, outside of this, I'll send you a one-page summary of what we're talking about here. But unfortunately, it's not, a lot of people aren't embracing it because it requires a paradigm shift. It requires changing the way you're looking at it. And then, of course, as you and I both know, the number one obstacle to any sort of successful fundraising is a dysfunctional view of money. And unfortunately, a lot of our Christian brethren have very dysfunctional views of money, where they see it in ways that they give it attributes that it doesn't have, and they're sort of either afraid of it, or they're avoid it, or they go the other direction and become the itinerant evangelist that skips town. I mean, it's these kind of all this stuff because they have these dysfunctional views of how money functions in the world, and that's something we work to get over. But anyway, so now you got that job at the association, and you've got that, you've made that, you took that, right? You took that right then when they offered
Yeah,
it?
no, I just embraced it fully. Now I did, they were talking about, well, can you stay for 5 years? And I went, well, maybe 2, because I need to figure this out. And then you need to figure out if I can come back and do something better. I mean, I was not, maybe that was just, okay, here we are again. But, after that, after the 2 years, they came back again and asked for another 3. And then after that, I basically said, you know what, I don't know that this is something I feel like I need a contract or I need that kind of commitment. Let's just trust the Lord with this, which has been a beautiful way. And now I'm in my 13th year there. I would have never thought that I would have been there for 13 years. But to your point, what I love about it, when you were talking about all of these people coming together, I feel like Christian Leadership Alliance is the perfect example of 1 Corinthians 12, 4-7, where Paul is talking about the body, but he says many different gifts, many different activities, many different ministries, but the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the good of all. And when I think about what we do, we have all these different ministries, we have all of these different service providers that, much like you, are like, we want to help you do this thing really well and with excellence. And people have different gifts, and it comes together in a way where they're investing their best in each other. So my chief job is, how do we create the places and spaces where leaders can come together and do that? How can they live out that 1 Corinthians 4-7 as a community and grow together? Because there's the financial piece, but a donor should have a strong financial team that understands how to make that work hard and will steward it carefully. They need someone who can bring the right people together, the talent within the organization. That's the first ring of ministry for any ministry leader, is what's this team that God has assembled in order to do this? So how are they cared for? How are they filled up? How are they equipped? Do they have a strong team of people to carry out this mission? And then to think about things like, well, are they legally sound? Are they adhering to the things that they need to? Are they respecting those kind of authorities? And then how are they leveraging internet and technology in a way that they can subdue it and use it to do good? It's like one of those things that could be evil, but it can do a great good for the kingdom of God. And
It's like money, Tami. It can
it
be
is.
used any way you want to use it. It doesn't.
And marketing communication too.
It,
Yes, yes.
it's inherently morally neutral. You see, it's the force and the direction that's applied to it that gives it its
Everything.
yeah. Yeah.
So we get into the things of executive leadership and board governance. We get into the things of stewardship, people and finances, and then we get into relationship, which is really connecting hearts to ministry. So how are we telling the stories? How are we communicating the impact? What is that communication strategy? How are we relating well? And then how are we just leveraging all the resources? So for CLA, someone at CLA, if their team is engaging in all this stuff, when a gift comes in, you just have a team that's operating at a higher level of competency. that's also being trained and strengthening and fortifying their character to manage that investment,
There you go.
to really use it for its full purpose. And so to be able to see that work is just really an honor and privilege. I mean, I really see how the kingdom of God clicks and God's faithfulness. And we changed our vision statement to every Christian leader thriving, and then worked with the Azusa Pacific University to understand what was necessary in order for people to do that. And for men and women of God to be in a place of great humility, but also great confidence because of who they are and whose they are, and to be able to flourish despite the circumstances and know that regardless of what happens, it will always be well with their soul because God is in control. And getting people to that kind of internal strength just makes us stronger. And we saw that tested in 2020 when everybody kind of was spinning a little bit out of control and not really understanding it. And God provided a way for us to do our conference, which was 1 month after March 12th, digitally. And we connected that world, literally. The first time
That can we take 2 minutes to talk about that? Because those kind of events are months in the making. All right, they are
yes,
months in the making. So you are
or like a year in the making with the size of team I have.
so
Yes.
you're looking at 30, 40 days out. Suddenly it's not going to happen in person. What did you do?
Well, I got the news on March 12th that the hotel, that we couldn't do the event, that the governor had shut down meetings of our size. And I sat in this very chair in front of this very window, and I said, like numb, like, God, is Christian Leadership Alliance going to be the first casualty of COVID? And nobody was thinking about digital conferences or any of those things. And I just sat here and I said, Lord, I'm not even going to ask you why, because it's so much bigger than I could even understand, but tell me what to do. How do I walk this out in a way that can bring you glory, that can redeem the situation or whatever it is? I mean, Lord, just, I'm here, but I need you, which I'm there a lot, Larry. I'm there a lot. And I got a phone call from our text app because going into that event, Christian Leadership Alliance, the flywheel was turning, and it was turning fast. It was going to be the biggest conference. Membership was spiking to an all-time high. I mean, everything that could be good was happening going into that event, and then it just all stopped. And the tech firm contacted me and said, hey, we just had a meeting, and we think that platform that you and I have been talking about, we could turn that into and you're the only one that I know that could build it in the sky with us. And if you'll do that, we'll give it to you free.
So this was a win for
I
them
could not.
and a win for you. You see there?
And so, but then I went to the board. Now, this is the miracle. Every single keynote, every single sponsor, every single exhibitor, and every single faculty member said, I will get on and record my session.
There you go.
And we did it. And we did it. And then after it was over, I didn't know what was next. In fact, I remember having the conversation with my team, and I said, Lord's created this opportunity that I could not have ever thought of. I don't know what happens after this, but if we can meet the needs of our ministry leaders in the middle of this chaos, and we can become part of God's anchor for them, I don't know of a greater way to say, and this is how it ended, if it's to end. And then after it was over, I attended another meeting and I walked away, and God just basically said, go global. Now, Larry, Go Global was on the 2025 action item in the 5-year plan, not 2020. I had no idea what to do, and I did. I went to bed for 16 hours. And I woke up, and God reminded me of an Indian man who had come to the conference in 2019, who had been coming to CLA. And the first time I met him in 2012, he said, I'm here because God wants me to plant 1,000 churches in India. And, my first thing was, oh, you're at the wrong conference. There's so many conferences that do that. But he came faithfully. And in 2019, he called me aside, and I hadn't seen him that year. And he said, everybody, all of our churches are praying for you. We have 1,900 churches now in India.
Okay.
And I was pretty wrecked by that. And then God brought him back to me. And I just said, okay, we'll figure out how to do this. So first I had to ask for permission to keep the platform for free longer. And they said, absolutely. And they said, in fact, we're working on software. One day we hope we can do everything in 300 languages. And I said, of course you are. Of course you are.
Okay.
Of course you're doing that.
We're going to pause, Tami. No, we're getting close to time, but what I see is COVID became a real watershed in a way that was totally unanticipated. Let's just leave it there for the moment. We're going to come back in another edition and do the second half of this, because I want to hear the next piece of this. So your bio, the bio has people how they can contact you. So I won't take up time for that, but I want to thank you for your time today. This has been incredible. So
it's because God's incredible, Larry, and we get to just be, we're on the stage down here. The angels in heaven are watching on, and they're watching this all unfold, and they're saying, I wish we could get in on it. Right.
Right.
I mean, we're down here. God's redemption plan is being worked out, and he's doing it in ways that we can't imagine. And that's what I say every day to my team. I'm like, we get to do this.
Yeah. All right.
We get to do this.
Soon. Again, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for just giving the opportunity to share in a way that I trust points people to the Jesus that I love.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And you heard Tami Heim, who's the CEO of Christian Leadership Association. For some reason, I want to call it Alliance, and I know that's right.
It is Alliance. No, actually, that is correct. It's Christian Leadership Alliance.
Excuse me. I'm the one that's a Christian Leadership Alliance. We got that right. And she'll definitely be reappearing again. You'll be getting notice of that. But thank you very much. And there'll be another episode with another outstanding leader very soon.